Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. What you are about to hear is a fictional story, but the lesson within it is painfully real. Sometimes, people mistake silence for weakness. They assume that just because an old man keeps his head down and fixes things around the house, he has no power, no resources, and no spine. But let me tell you this, the most dangerous men in the room are usually the ones who don't feel the need to announce their presence. They simply observe, wait, and when the time comes, they unleash hell. Don't let greed trap you. Now let's get into it. My name is Walter Jensen. I am 72 years old, and I live in a quiet, unassuming town just outside of Columbus, Ohio. For most of my life, I've been a man of action rather than words. You see, before I became a structural engineer, I spent a significant portion of my youth in the military special operations. To be precise, the military taught me discipline, patience, and the undeniable value of situational awareness. After my service, I transitioned into structural engineering and eventually opened my own security consulting firm. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was an honest one. I worked grueling, 80-hour weeks, built a solid financial foundation, and learned that true strength is quiet. My wife, Margaret, understood this about me better than anyone. She used to say, "Walter, you measure love in actions, not words." And she was right. When our son, Michael, was growing up, I wasn't the type of father to deliver poetic speeches about the meaning of life. Instead, I showed my love through reliability. I fixed his broken bicycles. I stood on the sidelines of every freezing baseball game. I worked double shifts to ensure his college tuition was paid in full without him ever having to take out a dime in student loans. I was the unshakable foundation of his life. But everything changed 12 years ago when Margaret passed away after a brutal, drawn-out battle with cancer. Anyone who has lost a spouse after 40 years of marriage knows exactly what that kind of silence feels like. The house suddenly felt like a cavern. The days stretched out, agonizingly long, and every single room echoed with memories of a life that was gone forever. For 2 years after her death, I lived alone, quietly managing my grief. Then, Michael's world came crashing down. He had attempted to open a high-end landscaping and hardscaping business with 2 partners. At first, the venture looked incredibly promising. They had big contracts, expensive equipment, and grand visions. But a combination of a volatile economy, poorly negotiated contracts, and one severely dishonest partner completely destroyed the company. Within a matter of months, Michael and his fiancée, Rachel, were drowning in a sea of crippling debt. I still vividly remember the evening he came to my house to ask for help. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, his shoulders slumped, looking heavier and older than his years. "Dad," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what we're going to do. We're losing everything." Rachel sat right beside him. For the first and perhaps only time in our relationship, she looked genuinely humble. At the time, they were planning a massive, expensive wedding, one that Rachel absolutely refused to downsize, despite their financial ruin. They were also trying to maintain a lifestyle they could no longer afford. The thought of my son losing his footing broke my heart. I told Michael I would help them, and I did. What neither Michael nor his manipulative fiancée knew was that I had already made a massive financial and logistical decision years earlier. After Margaret died, I had quietly sold our massive family estate and used the funds to purchase a beautiful, heavily upgraded property across town. I didn't buy it in my name. I bought it through an LLC, Jensen Property Holdings, that my longtime attorney and friend, Frank Holloway, had helped me establish. It was a standard estate planning maneuver designed to protect assets and avoid messy probate issues in the future. The house was perfect. It had 4 large bedrooms, a sprawling backyard, a top-tier security system I had personally installed, and it was located in one of the best school districts in the state. I offered the house to Michael and Rachel. I told them they could live there for a nominal monthly fee, an amount that barely covered the property taxes and basic maintenance. I framed it as a rental that I was helping them secure from a private landlord. I never once mentioned that I was the actual owner of the property. At the time, it didn't seem necessary. Family was family, or so I naively believed. I thought I was giving them a safe harbor to rebuild their lives. I even moved into the attached mother-in-law suite at the back of the house, offering to act as their live-in handyman and property manager to save them even more money. The suite had a large bedroom, a small kitchen, and an old bathtub, but it also had a secret room, a hidden chamber I had built behind a false wall in the closet. That secret room held my military gear, my structural engineering blueprints, a secure safe containing the LLC documents, and a dedicated communication line to my old security consulting firm. For the first couple of years, the arrangement worked beautifully. We shared Sunday dinners. We watched football games together. Rachel seemed endlessly grateful for the cheap rent and the constant free labor I provided. Michael seemed relieved that his financial burden had been lifted. It felt like we had successfully navigated a massive storm as a family. But then, the subtle shifts began. That is the insidious thing about toxic family dynamics. They rarely shatter. All at once they crack little by little, microaggression by microaggression, until the entire foundation crumbles. As Michael's new career stabilized and Rachel began climbing the corporate ladder at a local marketing firm, her gratitude slowly morphed into a grotesque sense of entitlement. She started making comments. At first, they were small, seemingly innocuous remarks that were easy to brush off. "We'd have so much more room for a home gym if Walter didn't store his old tools in the garage," she would say to Michael, right in front of me. Or, "It must be nice to just putter around as a glorified handyman all day without any real responsibilities." Initially, I laughed these comments off. I assumed it was just the stress of their upcoming wedding and their demanding jobs talking. But as the months turned into years, her comments became sharper, deeply personal, and relentlessly frequent. Rachel was a classic manipulator, a textbook gaslighter who systematically chipped away at my dignity. One evening, during a dinner I had cooked and paid for, she threw an absolute tantrum because I had left a single, washed coffee mug sitting on the counter to dry instead of putting it in the cabinet. "For God's sake, Walter," she sneered, her eyes flashing with a cold, dismissive anger. "Is it really that hard to clean up after yourself? I feel like I'm running a daycare for the elderly. This is our home, and you need to respect our space." I stood there, momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of her statement. A coffee mug. You would have thought I had taken a sledgehammer to the kitchen island. I slowly turned my gaze to Michael. He sat there, staring blankly at his plate. I waited, expecting him to defend me, to remind his fiancée that I was his father, the man who had bailed them out of total ruin. I expected him to show a fraction of the loyalty I had shown him his entire life. Instead, he focused intently on his mashed potatoes and remained completely silent. That silence hurt infinitely more than Rachel's venomous words. "Strangers do not owe you loyalty or respect. Your own blood does." From that moment on, the atmosphere in the house changed drastically. Decisions about the property were made without consulting me. My belongings were moved from the garage and thrown into the basement without my permission. Conversations would instantly stop the second I walked into a room. I noticed everything. With my background in special operations and security consulting, my situational awareness was always dialed in. I noticed the expensive packages arriving at the door daily. I noticed the luxury car Rachel suddenly leased. I noticed the way she smirked at me whenever I was forced to fix a leaky pipe or repair the HVAC system, treating me not like a father, but like the hired help. She truly believed she was the queen of the castle. She believed she had successfully marginalized me, turning the old man into a compliant, invisible ghost living in the back suite. But what Rachel didn't realize was that I wasn't just a retired old man. I was a highly trained veteran, an engineer who understood every inch of the structure we lived in, and the absolute, undisputed legal owner of the ground she walked on. And she was about to make a fatal mistake. The tension in the house began to suffocate me. Every interaction was a carefully calculated test of my patience. Rachel would intentionally leave messes in the living room, waiting to see if I would clean them up. She would invite her equally insufferable friends over for lavish weekend brunches, parading me in front of them as if I were a servant. "Oh, Walter will handle the grill," she would announce, with a dismissive wave of her hand. "He doesn't really have anywhere else to be." Her friends would snicker, glancing at my faded jeans and work boots. I didn't care about their shallow opinions, but I cared deeply about the fact that my son allowed this blatant disrespect to continue unabated. Michael had surrendered completely. He had chosen the path of least resistance, trading his backbone for a temporary, fragile peace in his relationship. One Saturday afternoon, I decided I couldn't simply let this fester. I needed to know where my son stood. I invited Michael to a local diner we had frequented dozens of times when he was younger. It was a classic joint red vinyl booths, the smell of black coffee, and a waitress who had known us both for 20 years. For a brief moment, sitting across from him, things felt normal. We talked about sports, the weather, and his expanding business. But the elephant in the room was suffocating, and I finally addressed it. "Mike," I said carefully, setting my coffee cup down. "Are things okay between us?" He looked up, clearly startled. "What do you mean, Dad? Everything is fine." I studied his face. I was looking for the son I had raised, the young man I had taught to stand up for himself. "I feel like you've been pulling away, and I feel like Rachel's hostility toward me is escalating. I need to know what's going on." Michael hesitated, rubbing his forehead in a gesture of pure exhaustion. "Rachel is just under a lot of stress with the wedding planning, Dad. She's trying to map out our future. Sometimes she feels like we're stuck, like we can't move forward." "Stuck?" I repeated, my military instincts flaring. I knew exactly what that meant. "And am I part of what's making her feel stuck? Is my presence here an obstacle to your future?" He didn't answer immediately. His silence lasted for 5 agonizing seconds. Finally, he looked away and muttered a single word. Sometimes, that word hit me like a physical blow, not because it was shouted in anger, but because it was the truth. He wasn't defending me. He was rationalizing her toxic behavior. He was slowly accepting her narrative that I was a burden, a relic of the past, standing in the way of their glorious future. I paid for our lunch, left a generous tip, and we walked out to our cars in near silence. That evening, sitting alone in my hidden chamber within the mother-in-law's suite, I activated the secure terminal connected to my security consulting firm. I began running background checks and financial audits on their public records. If they felt stuck, there was a reason, and with Rachel leasing luxury cars and booking 5-star venues, I needed to know the full extent of the financial damage. What I found was alarming. Their credit cards were maxed out. They had taken out high-interest, personal loans. The only way they could possibly afford the lifestyle Rachel was projecting was a massive, sudden influx of cash. But from where? The answer came to me purely by accident. It was a brisk Tuesday afternoon. In late October, I was in the backyard, replacing a rotten board on the privacy fence. The tools in my hands felt familiar, comforting. The windows to the master bedroom were open, and through the crisp autumn air, I heard Rachel's voice. She was on speakerphone, and her tone was dripping with that signature arrogance I had come to despise. "I'm telling you, it's the only way," Rachel was saying to one of her friends. "This house is a total goldmine, but it's holding us back. We need capital for the wedding and the down payment on the new place in Malibu." Her friend replied, the voice slightly distorted by the phone speaker. "Are you sure Michael is on board with selling it? What about his dad?" Rachel let out a sharp, mocking laugh that made my blood run cold. "Oh, please, Michael will do whatever I say. He knows I won't walk down the aisle if we're stuck in this suburban nightmare. As for Walter, the old man is clueless. He's just a handyman. He thinks he's staying here forever. Once we sell this dump, we'll clear at least $800,000. We'll toss Walter a few grand and stick him in a cheap retirement home. He won't have a choice." I froze. My hands gripped the hammer so tightly my knuckles turned white. Sell it? I thought, my mind racing. She was completely, utterly certain that the house belonged to Michael. She had obviously assumed that because I was acting as the property manager, and because Michael had signed the initial utility paperwork, the property was legally theirs. She had no concept of the LLC. She had no idea that I held the undisputed title. She was planning to sell my house right out from under me to fund her vanity wedding. I didn't confront her. Not then. A confrontation without absolute leverage is just a screaming match, and I do not engage in screaming matches. I finished the fence, packed up my tools, and walked back into my suite. My heart wasn't pounding with panic. It was pounding with cold, calculated fury. That night, I retreated to my secret room. I locked the heavy steel door behind me and opened my encrypted laptop. I accessed the local real estate listings. Sure enough, there it was, my property, listed as a private off-market sale. She had hired a shady cut-rate real estate agent who hadn't bothered to run a thorough title search yet, likely assuming the deed was cleanly in Michael's name due to forged or falsified preliminary disclosures Rachel had provided. They were actually bringing potential buyers through the house while I was out running errands. They were staging my home. I immediately picked up my encrypted phone and dialed a secret distress code to my security firm's central dispatch. It was a code meant for compromised assets. Within minutes, I had 2 discreet security operatives assigned to monitor the property's perimeter. Then I called Frank Holloway. "Frank," I said, my voice steady, "they're trying to sell the house." Frank was silent for a moment, then he chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "Walter, legally speaking, they can't sell a damn thing. They aren't on the deed. The LLC owns the property. The moment the title company pulls the actual records for closing, the entire sale will spectacularly implode." "I know," I replied, staring at the blueprints of the house pinned to my wall. "So why haven't you told them?" Frank asked, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Why not just shut this down right now and kick her to the curb?" "Because," I said, the disappointment weighing heavy in my chest. "I need to see how far Michael will let this go. I need to know if my son is going to stand beside her and try to throw me out on the street. If I tell them now, she'll just pivot and manipulate the situation to make herself the victim. I need them to walk right up to the edge of the cliff. And if they jump, I'll let them fall." Frank sighed. "Whenever you're ready to pull the trigger, Walter, I'll be there. But be prepared, this is going to get ugly. I survived 3 tours in combat, Frank," I replied coldly. "I can handle a spoiled bride-to-be." The weeks leading up to Christmas were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Rachel stopped hiding her disdain entirely. The house was constantly filled with real estate brochures, moving boxes, and fabric swatches for her new imaginary mansion. Michael looked like a dead man walking. He was visibly vibrating with guilt and anxiety, but his fear of losing Rachel eclipsed whatever shred of morality he had left. I played my part perfectly. I continued to fix the leaky faucets. I shoveled the driveway. I acted like the oblivious, grateful old man they thought I was. I watched them build their entire future on a foundation of absolute lies. Then came Christmas Eve, the night the hammer finally dropped. The holiday season is supposed to be a time of warmth, reflection, and family. But in that house, it felt like a countdown to an execution. The tension was palpable. The air was thick with unspoken ultimatums. Rachel had invited her entire family and a large group of her superficial friends for a lavish Christmas Eve dinner. The house was decorated to the nines, funded entirely by the impending fraudulent sale of my property. Throughout the evening, Rachel paraded around like the lady of the manor. She openly mocked my sweater, ordered me to fetch drinks for her guests, and loudly complained to her mother about the inconvenience of having an elderly dependent taking up space. I sat quietly in the corner, eating my dinner, observing the sheer magnitude of her arrogance. I was scanning the room, analyzing the exits, noting the exact level of complicity in Michael's downcast eyes. He wouldn't even look in my direction. By 10 o'clock, the guests finally began to filter out. The laughter died down, the front door closed for the last time, and an eerie, heavy silence descended upon the living room. It was just the 3 of us left, me, Michael, and Rachel. I stood up to take my empty plate to the kitchen, but Rachel stepped into my path. She folded her arms across her chest, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. "Walter," she said, her voice dripping with venomous authority. "We need to talk." I looked at her, my expression completely unreadable. "All right, talk." I followed her gaze toward the front door. Sitting there, positioned directly under the entryway chandelier, was a large, worn suitcase. My suitcase. They had packed my belongings. The realization didn't hit me with sorrow. It hit me with a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the fatal mistake. Rachel sat down on the expensive leather sofa. Michael remained standing, awkwardly shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking like a man marching to the gallows. Neither of them looked surprised. This ambush had been meticulously planned. "We've been discussing our future," Rachel began, adopting a faux sympathetic tone that made my stomach turn. "With the wedding coming up, and our plans to expand our lifestyle, we really need more space. We need privacy. We can't move forward with you lurking in the background." I turned my piercing gaze to my son. "Is that right, Michael? You need privacy?" Michael nodded weakly, staring a hole into the hardwood floor. "Yeah, Dad, we think it's time for some changes. There are some really nice senior apartment complexes near the highway. They have activities, people your own age." He was reciting a script written by the sociopath sitting on the couch. "So," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and calm, "you are kicking me out of the house on Christmas Eve." Rachel let out an exasperated sigh, standing up to assert dominance. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Walter. It's not like you own the place. You've had a free ride here for years. The best gift you can possibly give us right now is to just pack up and disappear. We packed your essentials. You can come back for the rest of your junk after the holidays." She pointed to the suitcase. "The Uber is already waiting outside. Goodbye, Walter." I looked at Michael one last time. I gave him one final silent opportunity to intervene. To be a man. To remember the sacrifices I had made to keep him from utter financial ruin. I waited for him to speak, to stop this madness, but his silence was absolute. He had made his choice. I didn't yell, I didn't beg, I didn't reveal the truth about the LLC. I simply gave Rachel a cold, dead-eyed stare that wiped the smirk right off her face. I walked over, picked up the suitcase, and walked out into the freezing Ohio night. As the cold air hit my face, I didn't feel broken. I felt liberated. The waiting was over. I pulled out my phone, immediately disabled the house's master Wi-Fi network, locked out their access to the smart thermostats, and dialed Frank. "Frank," I said, watching the snow fall under the streetlights. "It's time. Unleash hell." The next few weeks were a masterclass in strategic silence. I rented a luxury executive suite downtown paid for in cash and waited. Rachel and Michael proceeded with their grand plan, completely oblivious to the fact that they were walking directly into a minefield. They scheduled the closing for the sale of the house for mid-February. They had actually found buyers, a wealthy couple looking for an investment property, who were willing to pay top dollar in cash. Rachel was practically vibrating with excitement. She had already put down a massive, non-refundable deposit on a waterfront wedding venue using high-interest credit, banking entirely on the impending windfall from the house. Closing day arrived crisp and clear. The title company was located in a sleek, glass-paneled high-rise in downtown Columbus. I arrived 30 minutes early. Frank met me in the lobby, carrying a thick, leather-bound folder. "You ready for this, Walter?" Frank asked, adjusting his tie. "Once we walk in there, there is no going back. The financial fallout for them will be catastrophic." "I built that foundation, Frank," I replied, stepping into the elevator. "I have every right to tear it down." We entered the title company's offices through a side door and waited in an adjacent glass conference room. Through the blinds, I had a clear view of the main closing room. At exactly 10 o'clock, Michael and Rachel strutted in. Rachel was wearing a brand new designer outfit, clutching a designer handbag, looking like she had already won the lottery. Michael looked tense, but relieved. The buyers arrived shortly after. The closing attorney, a sharp-looking man in a tailored suit, sat at the head of the heavy mahogany table. He opened the massive file in front of him, adjusted his glasses, and began sorting through the documents. For 10 minutes, everything was routine. Signatures were requested. IDs were checked. Rachel was practically bouncing in her seat, pen poised to sign her name to a fortune. Then, the attorney stopped. He frowned, flipping back to the first page of the title report. He read it again. He looked up, his expression hardening into professional concern. "I'm sorry," the attorney said, his voice cutting through the cheerful chatter in the room. "But we have a serious problem here." Rachel's smile vanished instantly. "Excuse me. What kind of problem?" The attorney pushed the document toward the center of the table. "The sellers listed on these documents, Michael and Rachel, do not own this property. You cannot legally sell this house." The room went dead silent. The buyers exchanged confused, alarmed looks. Michael leaned forward, his face draining of color. "What are you talking about?" "There has to be a mistake. I've lived there for years." "There is no mistake, sir," the attorney replied firmly. "The title search is crystal clear. The property is exclusively owned by a corporate entity, Jensen Property Holdings LLC. You are not listed as owners, members, or authorized signatories. Attempting to sell this property constitutes criminal fraud." Rachel slammed her hand on the table. "That's impossible. It's his house. We pay the utilities." "Paying utilities does not establish ownership, ma'am," the attorney said coldly. Rachel was hyperventilating now. "Well, who the hell owns Jensen Property Holdings?" At that exact moment, Frank pushed open the doors to the main conference room. I stepped inside, the heavy glass doors clicking shut behind me. The silence that followed was absolute. I walked slowly to the end of the table, my military posture impeccable, my eyes locked directly onto Rachel. I will never forget the sequence of emotions that played across her face. Confusion, disbelief, and then sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. "I do," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "I am the sole managing member of Jensen Property Holdings LLC." Michael stared at me, his jaw physically dropping. He was completely left speechless. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "I'm protecting my assets," I replied calmly. Rachel sprang out of her chair, her face red with rage. "You lied to us, you miserable old man. You let us think the house was ours. We have a wedding to pay for. I have contracts signed. You owe us this money." She lunged toward me, raising her hand as if she were actually going to strike me. It was her final fatal mistake. My military reflexes kicked in before I even consciously registered the threat. I didn't strike her, but I stepped inside her guard, grabbed her wrist with a grip like a steel vise, and twisted it just enough to force her back down into her chair. "Sit down," I commanded, my voice snapping like a whip. "And shut your mouth." She froze, terrified by the sudden display of physical authority from the man she thought was just a weak handyman. The buyers, realizing they were in the middle of a massive family catastrophe and a fraudulent sale, immediately grabbed their coats and walked out of the room without a word. The sale was dead. I turned to Michael, who was shaking visibly. "I bought that house 10 years ago. Michael, I bought it to give you a safe place to live when you ruined your first business. I charged you a fraction of the cost. I maintained it. I fixed the pipes. I mowed the lawn. I lived in a converted closet while you and your fiancée treated me like human garbage." "Dad, I didn't know." Michael stammered, tears forming in his eyes. "It wouldn't have mattered if you did." I roared, the anger finally breaking through my stoic facade. "You let her disrespect me in my own home. You handed me a suitcase on Christmas Eve and told me to disappear. Well, I disappeared, and now I'm back." I pulled a legal document from Frank's folder and threw it onto the table in front of them. "That is an official 30-day eviction notice. You have exactly 1 month to pack your things and vacate my property. If you take so much as a light bulb that belongs to me, I will have you both arrested for theft." Rachel burst into hysterical tears. Without the sale of the house, she was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. For a wedding she could no longer afford, with no home to live in, and her entire facade shattered into a million pieces. Michael buried his face in his hands, openly weeping. "Dad, please, we have nowhere to go. I'm so sorry." "I know you are, Michael," I said softly, the anger suddenly draining away, leaving only a profound sadness. "But apologies don't repair a shattered foundation. You made your choice on Christmas Eve. Now, you have to live with the consequences." I turned around and walked out of the conference room, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their own greed. I never went back to that house. Once they were evicted, I sold the property legally. and for a massive profit, and used the funds to purchase a beautiful, secluded cabin by a lake far away from the suburbs. I spend my days fishing, consulting for my security firm on my own terms, and enjoying the absolute peace that comes with self-respect. Michael and Rachel never got married. The financial strain of the canceled wedding and the eviction destroyed their relationship within months. Michael currently lives in a small apartment across the state, working off his debts. We speak occasionally. The conversations are brief, heavily guarded, but they are a start. Trust is like a structural support beam. Once it snaps, it takes years to rebuild, and it's never quite as strong as it was before. But I survived. I learned that you cannot buy loyalty, and you should never sacrifice your own dignity to appease someone else's arrogance. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story of retribution, hit that like button. Subscribe for more. Ember. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak one. Until next time, stay sharp.